Hello and welcome to the RaceFF podcast. I am your host, Jaime Garcia. And today, guys, I am super excited to talk to these people. These are kind of like a lot of people that I meet, Instagram people that I share reels with. And then just, like there are people that do like awesome work. And I love highlighting people who do awesome work. And honestly, like seeing somebody that grows the class, especially nowadays, is really impressive work. And today I have two people representing us, the Spec3 racing class in NASA, Taylor Johnson and Sean O'Hara. Thank you for coming on, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Yeah, so I mean, we've like I got first introduced to you guys, I think through Dylan when you guys were posting some like memes back and forth, and I was just like, oh man, these guys are cool. Like this is the type of stuff that I want to see. And yeah, I saw you guys like starting to grow up, like the Spec 3 class. I think it was in Mid-Atlantic region, and then
Yep.
it started to blow up from there more and more. And now you guys have gotten as far as SoCal. So that's really, really impressive. So tell me, when did you guys decide to go Spec 3 in terms of the chassis? Or was it a deal where you guys had other cars and then you saw how cheap these cars were? Like, what was the, I guess, starting for the class?
So, do you want to know about the history of Spec 3 first, or do you specifically want to know about Sean and I's journey to picking Spec 3? Because we didn't make the class.
Okay.
We can speak to either, though.
Okay, let's do a little bit of the history of Spec 3 and then why you guys jumped in.
Cool. Sean, do you want to lead off, or do you want me to run with it?
Sure, I'll roll in, and then I'm sure you'll supplement.
Oh, I will.
Spec 3 started well before Taylor and I joined the class. I actually don't have any idea what year it started. I never cared to learn that.
2010.
Yeah, sure, 29. So it started with the E36 325i, which we still run today, and it started in Mid-Atlantic and kind of never grew out of Mid-Atlantic. It had like little pods actually in California way back when. And then, but it mostly, that kind of died off, and then it mostly stayed at Mid-Atlantic. But it was basically designed to be Spec E30 for the newer chassis, and it really didn't deviate from, we're just Spec E30 version 2. And then Taylor came along, and around that same time, when was that, Taylor?
2021.
Yeah, in 21, I would say in 2019 and 2020, the talks started in Mid-Atlantic of like, guys, we need a rebirth. Like, this class is awesome. It has so much potential that it's not living up to. And so we did little stuff. We did like, hey, now you can run an M3 front bumper that looks real cool, and people like race cars that look real cool. And we changed from 15-inch wheels to 17-inch wheels, which really was transformational for the car. It looks awesome, and it really changes the dynamic. Now it actually, like, before it was like turn in, wait 2 seconds, car actually turns. Now it actually, does the thing that you tell it to do when you tell it to do it. So those were huge changes, and we've made other kind of smaller changes along the way to make the class a little more accessible, open up different. You can start with an M3 if you want now, and you have to put in like the M50 and the drivetrain and all that stuff. It's a more complicated build, but you can do it. And then I'll turn it to our social media guru here, which is really responsible for taking a class that was awesome and spreading it to the masses so people actually know about it and can join.
Yeah. So some context, I guess, for the 2008, 2009 stuff is really interesting. You know, I've done a lot of Spec 3 archaeology where I've looked through all the things I can find on the internet. And I guess for anyone listening, we should outline this, right? Spec 3 is the spec racing class for the E36. So you have Spec E30, which is the second generation of the 3 Series. And then you have the E36, which is the third generation. And then you have it depends on how you look at it. You know, you can look at the O2s as the first. But anyway,
Yes.
And then, Spec E46 follows after that, all that. So Spec 3 is for the E36s. We aren't called Spec E36 due to some trademark issues where another org filed for the trademark, which is not really common in grassroots motorsports to squat on a trademark like that. But so we're called Spec 3, and that kind of caused a lot of the initial difficulties with the promotion of the class because people I'm sorry if you hear my dog.
Yeah, fine.
A lot of people don't know what it is right off the bat. And anyway, sorry, the dog really distracted me.
so essentially, like you had a branding issue where you couldn't really call it the chassis code that everybody would be able to like easily look up in there. So you have like a little bit of a a little barrier of a search, if you will, because there's that chassis code that everybody knows, and there's that little hang up. But looking at the cars and that you guys are allowing, because I have your rules set up here, it looks like one of the biggest things that I think is kind of not highlighted right now is that the price for the cars are actually very, very inexpensive.
Yeah, we try to market that, but then people can be a bit silly sometimes, and people really like to say you can't find E36s anymore, and that's not true at all, right? They sold 600,000 of these in North America, and if you look at any class worth building a car for at all, these are the cheapest donors, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And you just have to wait and look for longer than 3 days. The other thing is, and people really forget this sometimes, is they aren't hard to find. Like if someone wanted to go buy a E36 to build into a Spec 3 for $4,000, you can find that all day. It's just that people for some reason don't understand actually how much racing costs, and they think that they should be able to buy a car for $500, and then they go and look on Craigslist or whatever, and then they find a Grand Marquis, or they find a Saturn, right? And they're like, oh, I could buy this for $500. And it's like, well, yeah, you could, but then kind of echoing some stuff that Con said in your last episode, where are you going to race that, right?
Yeah.
And so
you're lemons. That's it.
Yeah, it could be lemons, and we don't need to get into that. But sprint racing is an entirely different thing, right? We are racing. Every tenth matters, all that stuff. So yeah, I mean, Spec 3, you cannot. There's nothing out there that's cheaper as far as getting started and building a car. There are some other options if you want to buy like a Formula V or a 944 spec or something like that. Just do your research on where classes are heading and their growth patterns and things like that. So
yeah, I mean, look, in terms of being a cost-effective person, I feel like I embody that. I live it. As Bane said, many people come into the darkness. I was built by it, molded by it. I see not a lot of Batman Returns fans in the crowd, but okay. But yeah, like I look at these prices, and I've seen these cars because of the drifting scene, where people have used them for drifting. Usually now they're kind of going into the E46s because they're a little bit cheaper to get.
Yeah, anyone listening, E46 330, really good for drifting. Way better than an E36. They make more power, get an E90, get an F30 or whatever they're called, E36, you don't want that for drifting. Don't do it.
No, definitely don't. We want nice quarter panels still for the
yeah.
But yeah, like typical cost of like a $10,000 build, that's really, really hard to beat.
10,000 is not really accurate anymore, just with the prices of things.
Yeah, but I mean, you could have found something really close. Obviously, you're going to be changing seats, wheels, tires, driver preference things. But yeah, to get something on the low end there, because I mean, we know what a top 5 Spec Miata will cost. And this you're not getting that for under $25K. Like that just doesn't exist.
Yeah, and I would imagine, and people do like to call this out, and there's a bit of truth to it, where when the racing has as many people and has such high reward for winning, costs will go up, right? So like Spec Miata is always a tough one to compare to, because you don't have to look too far into history to see where NASA had a $100,000 cash prize for the winner of Spec Miata at Nationals, right? So like, of course, if $100,000 was up for grabs in Spec 3, I imagine you would see some more expensive cars, right?
For sure.
But what Sean will speak to is that, to a kind of a point of driving us to insanity, our rules are super tight, like super duper tight. It's not a builder's class at all. You can't spend money to do R&D. There's nothing to figure out. So even if you went and, and just, I don't really like to talk about other classes, but the example of Spec Miata is brought up. Spec Miata is not a dyno class, and dyno certification and testing, all that has its own can of worms to open up. But since it's not a dyno class, there is a lot of gain to be made in blueprinting a motor, for example, right? Because as long as it's built within spec, it doesn't matter how much power it makes. But for Spec 3, it does not matter what you do to the motor. If you blow the dyno, you blow the dyno. So my engine, for example, I've just done the head gasket on it. And just doing the head gasket, and of course the associated cleaning of the head and putting new seals and stuff in it and grinding the valves, not replacing anything there, I make at the peak horsepower. I'm even at potential of blowing it, right? So, there's literally nothing I can spend money on to make more power and to be more competitive as far as my engine or drivetrain, because I did a head gasket and it's at the limit. Right?
And that is absolutely by design, right? Like the horsepower and torque limits are artificially low, and they were based on originally my motor that I bought the car to build, and it came with a motor with like 220,000 miles, something like that, right? And it was a cherry of a motor. Oh, it's so good. And so we put that up on the dyno before we had the dyno rule in place. It put down some lovely numbers. And we said, okay, like that's kind of the best you're going to get out of a motor that just like comes with whatever donor car you buy or that you pull out of a junkyard or whatever. So let's set it there so it's easily achievable, and we don't have people out there blueprinting motors and doing crazy stuff. And so that's where it is.
And unfortunately, that's not a perfect, like, just to be fully transparent, that's not perfect, right? Out in SoCal, for example, we have cars being built. We have cars being built in almost every region. The only regions that we don't have cars that are Spec 3, silhouette would be NASA Hawaii. And,
that's right. There's a Hawaii.
Rocky Mountain and Mid-America. The other 9 NASA regions have some Spec 3 in some shape or form being built. So there's a lot of dyno variants, right, across all those, and correction factors and this and that, the other thing. And so it's not perfect. And, I think it's much better than the alternatives. And it's really equal, and there's no way to spend money to get more.
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of, not having to do crazy things to an engine to get it to a certain extent. I mean, there's arguments, especially with that you bring up in terms of dyno tuning, from people that, I did my dyno guy and he's closer to, ocean level, and then we race over at like Miller, which is like at 5,000 feet of elevation, and then
we have a spec tune as well. So there's literally nothing you need to do. Like if you blow a motor on a Friday on a test day, you go pick up an M50 out of a 525 automatic wagon and you install it that night. That's your motor. There's nothing else to do to it. You don't need to change anything. The tune is already in your DME. You don't need to change sensors or anything. Just literally throw it in there and drive it, and you're going to be presumably making pretty good power, and it's legal.
Yeah, leaking oil everywhere, most likely, but otherwise fine.
So we even take that out of it, right? And I'm very happy with our tune. Nobody really knows the secret sauce in it except for Epic, who made it. And the way that we keep that, it's actually pretty cool. It's kind of part of the reason why we don't allow the 328, among many other reasons. But our tune is just on a EEPROM chip, and it plugs into a decoder board, right? So the tune is encrypted, and it has to go through the decoder board, and you can't reproduce that decoder board because you don't know the key that's on it, right? So the way that you can do compliance is you take someone's DME out, you plug a known good chip into it, and since it is a specific hash or whatever it is, if you put a different tune on, it's not going to work. It's as simple as that.
Oh, that's right, because then because it's not communicating.
Yeah, if you change the tune on the chip, then you have to have a different decoder board to read that tune. So then if you just take a known good chip and you plug it in, you know that decoder board is doing something funky. And so, but there's no advantage to a tune anyway, right? Because it's dyno capped, and our tune is really good. There's another spec series out there that runs the E36 to a much lesser extent, and we see a good amount of them using our tune because it's just really good, and people can't replicate the power and stuff that it makes.
Yeah, and then
actually to the cost point, hopefully Epic's not listening, but I don't think the cost of our tune has gone up since.
I think they forgot about it.
Maybe, yeah. I think that they're just like, okay, we'll just keep printing these babies because the work is done for them, right? Like their sunk cost is already gone, and now they pay 4 cents a chip.
And ours is the cheapest on the market in that regard too. Other classes, you have to buy an entire DME and it's sealed with tape and stuff. For us, you just buy the chip, open yours, pop it on. And because of the decoder board, you can't cheat around it, right? So we don't have to worry about sealing DMEs and things like that.
So how much does that chip cost?
What is
200?
it? Yeah, $200.
That's not bad at all, man. That's really good.
And our exhaust is $400. And then that's it. And then you make 195 horsepower on a stock M50.
And I mean, look, credit for you guys, because I've had other people that do listen to the podcast and are not like FF people. And when I've like shared some of your guys' memes, or we've talked crap about your wrong stance on not allowing a wagon that's not even available in the US. They always say like, man, they actually have like, I looked at the rules, it looks fine. It doesn't look like anything bad in terms of like the cost being prohibitive or something like that. And that came from a guy who builds exhaust. He's like, man, their exhaust kit is kind of like what I would pay at my price. So good job on that, guys.
Thanks. Yeah, the whole goal is, it's two things, right? It's to keep racing fair first and foremost, to control costs, and then the third thing is accessibility, like Sean said. And it seems a little counterintuitive sometimes when we talk about restricting things, but that's part of accessibility, is when any person is able to go buy what they need, and they don't have to have, for example, a race shop that's built 10 of these cars that knows the secret sauce to guide them to say, oh, you want this, not that, right? It's like, for example, brake pads. We allow one brake pad, and that one brake pad compound happens to be completely free if you use our partner FCP Euro. You buy one set, warranty it over and over and over again for the rest of time. I've warrantied my brake pads probably 20 times at this point. And that's it, right? You don't need to experiment with what compound works best up front, what compound works best in the back, and all this stuff. I know some other spec classes where people are actually getting custom brake pad compounds shaped for them. And that sucks. It's stupid, right? Like, just let me race in the exact same car someone else has. And so that's part of the accessibility for us. So cost, accessibility, and fairness, and I think we somehow are getting it really right, in my opinion.
Yeah. We have the it's just a recipe, like just kind of to add on what Taylor just mentioned, but like basically there's no variation. I think our class has the least variation allowed of any spec racing series out there. Maybe with the exception of the like one-off classes, if you were to do, what the heck is NASA's like prototype looking car?
MPO1.
Oh yeah, NPO1.
Yeah, if you did an
you can get
MPO1,
those with,
right? Like that's like a
different
crazy
transmissions.
one-off. So sure, maybe they're a bit more spec than we are, but for anybody working off of a stock chassis car, I think we have the most rigid rule set. So you really can't build anything that's going to get you to the podium. And we have the constructor's guide that shows you the recipe, right? So like, how do I replace the ball joints on the front control arms, which are replaceable, even though BMW says they're not. We show you how to do that. Like, what alignment should I run? That's one of the few things you can adjust on the car. Look at the constructor's guide. We'll tell you, and we tell each other all the time in our like regional racer chats. People are like, a newer racer will say, what alignment do you guys run for this and that? And they get 3 or 4 responses within seconds of guys that are saying, here's what I run. I take that for what it's worth. But here are my settings.
Yeah. One thing that made me just sick was I saw on another race group's Facebook group, somebody said something about, what's the optimal coolant temp to make max power in these cars, right? Talking about a different class right now. And somebody literally said, and this person was someone that was in like a leadership position in some other race org, was like, I can tell you that there's a very specific number that you want to hit to make max power, but I won't tell you how or why or what it is. And what did they say? They said something along the lines of, that is what you get when you pay to be under someone's tent, right? Meaning when you pay to have your car supported at the track by some, team group. I'm trying to be vague here. And they were like, there's a specific number. Here's the way to make the most power in your car. I'm not going to tell you need to go pay a shop to go do it for you, which is just wild, right? Like, who wants to win that way? Who wants to do that? That's dumb.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of
dumb.
It's kind of it's kind of like what you're saying in terms of when we talked about the like prize money involved. Once you have like that kind of carrot in front of people are going to start like hiding some secrets and trying to look for an advantage because it's a competition at that point. But the thing that I like about what you guys have done here is it's obviously a competition, but you've taken kind of like a lot of that barriers of entry away and been super transparent. I mean, the fact that you have here like suggested prices for the DTC 60s brake pads that you have here is freaking awesome. And FCP Euro, shout out to them because I run their pads on my black hatchback because I'm running
you're certainly German hatchback, right?
Yeah, I have Porsche calipers on my 2,300-pound Civic.
I'm sure it's a lot of brake.
Okay.
Oh yeah, and again, I'm running one pad. I'll probably order another one just so that I can cycle them through the FCP Euro warranty. Yeah, that thing is so clutch.
Yeah, I do my oil, and the cool thing is people are absolutely incredulous when we explain this to them. But the reason we put out FCP Euro shirts is because we reached out and we're partnered, right? Spec3 and actually before I get into that, let me say one thing. Sean and I are not officially. We're not really. We have no official capacity with Spec3 or with NASA or anything like that. I happen to be a regional leader, but like we don't represent NASA. NASA just kind of lets us do stuff, and we work with the blessing of John McAvoy, who is the only person that you could consider to be like an official representation of NASA here. And even then, he doesn't work for them or anything. But so when I say we, I just mean basically we try to grow the class because we race it and we love it. We don't get anything from it. And then we go talk to NASA National and say, hey, do you mind if we do this? And they go, yes or no. And so we reached out about FCP Euro, and they said, sure, go for it. And then we worked with Spec3 FCP Euro to get them connected and partnered up. And so when we did that, we got to speak with them to their head of the BMW group there. And we said, like, are you sure? Are you actually cool with people warrantying. I've warranted zip ties. I warranted my brake fluid, all my oil, all the gear oil, and all that stuff. And they're like, yes, we want you to do it. Even on a race car, we want you to do that. So I don't feel bad about it because that's their business model.
Yeah,
and then you can get that like hot boy oil, and it's fine.
Yeah,
it's very expensive on the front end, but whatever. Run the 300V.
Yep.
Yeah, I actually had a chance to meet. I forget who it was, but it was someone kind of high up there. I think it was the COO or something over at Laguna, and I was there with a buddy, Graham Downey, and he's like, "Yo, I heard you guys warranty oil. Like one of my customers came in there. He says, "Yeah, I don't pay for oil changes anymore. I just send it back to FCP Euro." And I told him, "You're full of shit." It's like, is he full of shit? He's like, "No, he's not." He's like, "That sounds like a scam. How is that not a scam? Sending you used oil?" It's like, "Well, you do pay for shipping." He's like, "Okay." And then he's like, "And when we look at the numbers, it's something like only 10% or 8% of sales. I forget what it was, but they're all like, because we've been able to do that, we've gained so many like clientele that will only buy from us that it's like it's kind of like a marketing budget at that point."
Yep, exactly.
Then
you get people like us that have no allegiance, no true affiliation, nothing to gain from it, but we're singing FCP Euro's praise because that's part of what enables us, right? Like if I could not warranty my brake pads and could not warranty my oil, and I had a little oopsie at Road Atlanta, had to replace a bunch of stuff on the front end. Oh, I've already bought all that from FCP Euro before, so now it's free to replace, right?
Yeah.
If I ever bin that control arm again, I'll just get another one from FCP. The tie rods and all that stuff. The steering rack, I just went ahead, I before I left the track, I ordered one from FCP because I'd already replaced it once. And I was like, if I replace this, it's free because I send the old one back. Or if I don't replace it, I just return it, right? And so it just really opens up the door on all that. And it's a perfect partnership for us because more so than almost any other racing class, we use stock parts. Stock brakes, stock, all the suspension is all BMW. Bushings, I think there's, I don't know, a handful. Like literally you count on your hand number of things in the suspension bushings that are not factory BMW, and you could run factory BMW if you wanted, and many people do. So
so like that, man, that is so clutch, because outside of that, like again, I am a very cost effective person, and I have been known to share my AutoZone phone number for warranties with other friends. So
might want to redact that part.
I think the statute of limitations is gone.
Yeah, this was all 12 years ago. Doesn't happen anymore.
20 years ago. I'm old, guys. 20 years ago. Back when you had to sign stuff on what was it, that carbon paper?
Oh yeah. The origin of CC, right? Carbon copy.
Yeah. Back when the screens were only green and black.
Yeah.
Oh man. Oh dude. So in terms of growth rate, because obviously I hinted at SoCal, and I think especially for you guys that are based out of the Mid-Atlantic
I'm
region. Not. Oh, what region are you in?
I am in the middle of 3. I live in Pittsburgh. So
I've been there. Beautiful city.
Pittsburgh's a cool place to visit.
Never rains.
And never. It snowed. Anyway, it's raining now. So so I live 2 hours from Mid-Ohio, which is Great Lakes, 2 hours or 2.5, 3 hours from Summit, which is Mid-Atlantic. And then, and really, 5.5 hours from Watkins Glen, which is Northeast. So I'm the Northeast leader for E46 and Spec3 and sometimes Spec E30. I run both Mid-Atlantic and Northeast, but if you look on the registration sheet, it says Northeast for me.
Okay.
I'll be running some Great Lakes in the future now that we're growing there.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay. Because, I feel like California is in its own little, like, island, because in terms of, like, outside of nationals, there's really very little crossover with California with any other region. I mean, outside of Arizona, but Arizona has a tough time because of how restrictive their tracks are.
So I think that I'm kind of in a unique position because I now have spoken to every region director except for the one for Hawaii about Spec3, and I've talked to people in all those regions, and you are right, and that's mostly due to population density, right? Once you go east of California, there's just way less racers. When you look at the East Coast, right? Even me in Pittsburgh, which is a fairly remote, large city, right? I used to live in Northern Virginia, where it's 2 hours to top 10 U.S. cities. But even where I'm at, I'm with 5-hour drive, I can get to 4 different NASA regions, and with a 8-hour towing circle, I'm close to 10 or 15 major tracks. So crossover stuff's a lot easier. But to going back to our growth across the United States is actually really interesting if you want to hear that story.
Yeah, no, it's definitely something that I want to hear, because there's no way to hide it, but my region and in North Cal, like what was of Honda Challenge is pretty much dead. So to see something grow is kind of like a lesson to be learned by those organizations.
Yeah, so just to kind of do the numbers first, to look at where we started, where we're at, where we're going to go. Spec3, like you alluded to, was just Mid-Atlantic. It was one of the most consistent race fields in the Mid-Atlantic NASA region for a decade, right? At least 5 cars, sometimes 10, at every single event, every single time for a decade. And that was great, right? And so when I lived in Virginia, I was looking at a class, and most people, I would say 99.9% of people, never look outside their NASA region. So what they see, and I hear about this in comments on social media, what they see locally is their world. They're like, oh, well, that class is dead because my region doesn't have it, or this class is super healthy because my region does have it, right? So if you looked at Mid-Atlantic, you would say, oh, Spec3 is super healthy because they have some of the biggest fields and all that stuff. So, I built my car. I was like, this is great. This makes all the perfect sense. And then when I looked around, I was like, oh, this class does not exist anywhere else. So this was 2021. So we can talk about how we did the rebirth and the branding and the marketing and all that stuff. But from there, we did have 1 or 2 cars that were kind of built in the Southeast. And then we were kind of like trying to push for people to build cars. And then we had a guy named Andy Schmidt who I helped him find a car. And he's based out of Charlotte. And then once he started racing consistently, then all the other people that were just kind of waiting in the wings, they're like, Spec3 makes sense, but why are there none down here? They built the Southeast, right? So now Southeast has, on a good weekend, 15 cars. And in the future, I hope to see 20 plus cars in the Southeast. So that came along in 2022, 2023. I moved to Pittsburgh in 2022 and became the Northeast leader after Sean, myself, and Charles Ford ran kind of an exhibition race at Watkins Glen. And people were like, oh, cool, Spec3, like Watkins Glen, that's awesome. People came to visit us to check us out. So then we started taking off there. So now we have a pretty healthy field. 2025 will be a big year for us up in the Northeast. And then from there, right, Southeast started to grow. So then some people in Florida built cars. And then, Florida is tricky because despite it having a huge population, there's not that many racers to go around, if that makes sense. And if people are racing, they're doing spec me out of the SCCA. Like NASA only has 1 race group down there, and it's not doing super well. So, to try to grow a new class down there is slim pickings, but we have interest. So then it started kicking off down there. And then just from the marketing and stuff, basically it has to be, it's like that board game Catan, right? Where you put the little hexagons down and they got to touch and you kind of expand across the board. It's the same thing here. It's like you can't grow, well, you can, but it's difficult to grow something in NorCal, right? Where they have nobody else to cross over with. But since Southeast will cross over with Florida and cross over with Mid-South, and Mid-Atlantic will cross over with Great Lakes and Northeast, then they have fields and then it grows, right? So now we're growing in Great Lakes. We had people that saw us racing at Pit Race and they loved that, and that's a Great Lakes event. So now we have tons of cars being built there, and it's spreading, right? It was Ohio, and now it's in Michigan and stuff like that. And then Mid-South now, right? So like if you do the mental map of the United States, we have the Eastern Seaboard and Great Lakes. And now it makes sense to go in Mid-South. So now we have a ton of cars being built in Mid-South. And now it's, okay, that's all covered. What's the next region over? Texas? Okay. Because now Texas will cross over with Southeast, Gulf South, Mid-South, and it'll grow there. And then once that field finishes taking off, I expect it'll take off in Mid-America. So then SoCal and NorCal have been a really uphill battle to get started because there's nobody to go run an exhibition race, right?
Exactly.
So I've been working with a lot of people in NorCal and SoCal about this, and we've just been lucky to have people that see it and they understand that the fields that you see today are not the fields that'll be there tomorrow or in 5 years, right?
Yeah.
And people want to push the class that they're in and say, look how many cars we have. Come join us, right? But then when you dig in deeper, you're like, oh no, like that's way more expensive than I thought. Or those cars are getting hard to find, parts are hard to find, or that racing doesn't appeal to me, stuff like that. So then they see Spec3 and it does check all those boxes for them. And the only problem with Spec3 in those regions is that there isn't 15 cars on grid. And think of another class where you can solve the only problem that class has. Right?
Yeah.
It doesn't exist. But Spec3, the only problem it has is field size. If you build a car, you're solving that problem. So, so we have some key people that are kind of spearheading it, right? So we've got Mike, we've got Robbie, and we've got Chris and other people in NorCal, SoCal. They're out there flying the flag in HPDE with Spec3 on the car. And then once they start turning some laps, it'll just be a snowball. And I hope to have big, healthy fields there.
Yeah, I mean, I've had so many conversations with people who are like, hey, I want to do wheel-to-wheel. I want to jump in and, race. Where can I go that makes sense? And realistically, if you don't have like a certain vehicle that you really want, and aside from the Spec Miata, because it's kind of the most universally known, there's also like a height and kind of size restriction that you run in with the Spec Miata. And man, the Spec3s, they can be really comfortable for bigger people. Like you're 6 feet plus, and you're maybe
Yeah, we were just looking at this recently. There was a paddock or a podium photo where we got a bunch of the guys in the Mid-Atlantic. I think it was at VIR together and did like everybody up on the podium, probably talking about 15 or so guys. I think there were maybe 3 or so out of those 15 that were below 6 foot. It's even like an abnormally tall class. It's very strange.
Yeah.
But comfort is one thing and fitting in the car, but it's also the type of racing too, right? And that's where like Spec Miata is not for everyone. I love Spec Miata. I hope to race it and rent a car and at some point when I'm not busy racing Spec3. But the idea of pack racing, I don't like that. I love tight racing. And there's tons of videos out there of me and Sean, or me and Andy, or me and John, or me and Charles, literally door to door for multiple laps in a row, like our cars are actually glued together, right? Never front to back, literally side to side. And so and bumping and folding mirrors and, bump drafting, all that's great. That's awesome. I love doing that with a couple cars. I don't like the idea of, like at Watkins Glen, a train of 10 cars literally pushing each other. And it just takes one person and then all the cars are totaled, right? And I don't know what it is about Spec3 and like the culture that we've created, but I cannot think of in the last 10 years any serious incident caused by car-to-car contact. There is car-to-car contact. We bump, we bang doors, we fold mirrors, we bump draft, all that stuff. It happens a lot.
There's nose panels.
But it's optional. It's consensual, right? You don't have to if you don't want to. But I've not seen anyone spin. Well, I can name probably 2 examples, but that's out of hundreds and hundreds of races, right?
Yeah.
It's just not common, and that's why I like it.
Yeah, and that's so important for a class, is that you have that kind of culture there. So I want to know a little bit more about like your guys' cars in specific. Like, so what color and what car number are you guys running?
Sean?
So mine is, I guess, known as the creamsicle. It's white and orange. Number 19. Behind me, I have an old hood that had a lot more gray on it, but now it's all white. I think both Taylor and I have like maybe not top of the line builds for the series. You know, we hired the same cage guy initially, who was one of the lower bidders, I would say.
The lowest.
Perhaps the lowest.
The most cost effective.
The most cost effective, man. That's some spin. But you know, we're both pretty much DIY builds. You know, like you farm out the cage because that's really specialty fabrication, and it's, as it turns out, hella important. But you know, like both of our cars were just built in our garages, basically, with some minimal assistance from shops here and there. But you know, I joined the class in 2019, 18, something like that. And it was just basically in Mid-Atlantic at that point, but it was a cool class. It was, you know, one of the things I tell people when they're like, what class should I build towards? Obviously, we encourage most of them to do Spec3. But you got to like the car that you're wrenching on and that you're racing, right? Because like, you're going to have to fix it. You're going to have to spend some long hours in the garage if you're DIY and everything like we are. And if you don't like it at the end of the day, like that's going to get real old real fast.
Yeah.
So the E36 is just a cool car. It's a great handling car. It's ubiquitous. If you need parts, they're out there. They're available for everything. So it's a phenomenal class. And at the end of the day, right, another thing that everybody should do is go out and meet the people that you're going to be racing with. And find out if they're people that you get along with or not. And, you know, unfortunately, as adult males, right, it's really easy to fall into like this isolationist, like all I have is my wife and my dog, and I don't really like hang out with friends anymore. That's a very easy thing for us to do. And I don't have any other friends that I see once a month from March to November and spend the whole weekend with, right? Like these guys are your best friends. They're going to become that, or your worst enemies. I don't know, but make sure you pick the right class. And so they become your friends, not your enemies. And Spec3 is fantastic for that. The culture is second to none.
That's so key. The idea of going out there and actually meeting people out of that. And that's kind of like the reason why I started the podcast. Sorry, I'm still getting over some sickness I was dealing with.
We have that effect on people.
But yeah, like it's so important to meet the people because you know, the ability to vibe with them, and oftentimes, you know, you're gonna need like a spare that they may have, and you know, it's a lot easier to help and help someone who's wrenched on your car or helped you swap tires when you're trying to get up to grid because it's raining. And then it's, you know, I know I'm telling that to Taylor, but it never rains over in Pittsburgh, so he doesn't know about this. But yeah, to swap over to rain tires and do that, and you know, that would be like kind of like an investment into that relationship that you're having with those people. And they're like, oh no, this guy, like, he made the mistake here, but he's done this in the past, and yeah, like I'll let that slide. And you know, you build equity with people, and I think that's really important.
Yeah, so
yeah, for sure.
So to loop that into you know, how I landed on the class personally and what my car is. So I drive also a sedan like Sean's. We have a really good split of sedans and coupes. And and let me get on a soapbox real quick. E36s are the first 3 series to have a coupe. If you have a 2-door E30, it's a 2-door sedan. I don't want to hear any argument against that. So anyway, so we do have coupes. First 3 series sedan have a true coupe. And yeah, so I have a sedan. Mine's the Oxford green. BMW people love to call out specific colors as a non-factory color for E36s, which means it's a pain in the butt every time I have to replace a fender or a bumper because I have to special order the paint and do it in my cold Pittsburgh garage. But yeah, a number 216, pretty easily identifiable, similar to Sean's where he has a unique color combo. Mine's green and yellow. So yellow cage, yellow numbers. big AKG Motorsport on the side, Phil's Tire Service sticker as well. And but the other thing is I mention that because my litmus test for how much money I can tell people in a race series have is how many people have custom liveries, like special. And I mean that differently than like just putting some lines, right? Some vinyl lines, but people that have like some oddly branded, like you can tell they're not giving them any money, but for some reason they put a company's name on their car kind of stuff, or like fancy patterns. And Spec3 has none of that. So it's just this huge mass of like very similarly colored cars, and you just have to tell them apart by like, oh, this one, Sean's is the one that's white but has an orange triangle on it. And like, oh, John's is white but it has a blue triangle on it, right? Mine's green, but I have the yellow numbers. But then, Alex Rubenstein, his is green, but he has the slightly gold numbers, right? So people confuse us all the time.
I think what you're saying is you need help from the anime community, and we need to get like anime girls
yes.
up on the side. Please. I would love that, like some like Attack on Titan kind of things.
I want a Naruto car, honestly.
Oh, dude!
And I'll run around the paddock like I'm in Naruto.
Dude, that would be sick. Just have like some ninja stars flying off on there and some kunai.
And then I'll throw the stars out the window on track. But so I landed on Spec3 for the exact same reason that Sean did, and it's actually interesting where I crowdsourced it. I was looking at cars, so I had a Miata. I've had a ton of Miatas. I love Miatas. I'm a Miata guy. And I had a Miata, and I was like, I can't turn this into a track car. It's too nice. I won't do it. So I sold it. I bought an E30, and I love E30s. I've had 5 of them. This first one destroyed my life. It was, it has the rear trailing arm stuff is just out of the Mesozoic era, and I could never get it aligned properly. And so I would have had to either like straighten the chassis or replace subframes. And, I was a recent grad. Like I just graduated college 6 months before that. And I was like, I can't do this. Right. So I hit the reset button and I asked around the paddock and asked all these people, what should I race? And time again, people in Mid-Atlantic that weren't even racing Spec3 would say Spec3, bunch of nice dudes. Right. So at the time, quite a few of these people don't race anymore because, they grew up and moved on with life and have families and stuff and had to back off because we're all budget oriented, right? You can't always do everything. But I went around and I talked to them, and they were all fantastic and they were so helpful. And I ended up actually buying my car that was a street car driven by a Spec3 racer. And he refused to sell it to me until he could get it fixed up and running well. And he did all this work over the winter, and I think I bought it for like $1,500, and he gave me a set of wheels and a suspension and an exhaust and all this stuff.
That's a come up.
And I drove it home. It was a daily driver for like 5 minutes before I ripped the interior out and started HBD E2.
It's really nice before it was Taylor's car.
It was such a nice car. And so I started building it in January of 2019. And then I got through HBD E2, and then I went into 3 by the end of 2019, and then COVID happened. I got the car caged in the middle of 2020, which was a very difficult time to try to do that. And then I did comp school in January 2021. So now I'm one of the old guys, but yeah, it was all like it just made sense. I looked at all the other classes and I tried to look into what it would take to build those other cars. And then when it came to, Spec3, the people were nice. And then they all were super helpful in doing it. And there's no guesswork, And if I could plug one URL, that would be spec3.org/join. If you want to go racing, this information can be generalized, and it gives you tips on how to know to go from nothing. You've never been on track. What do you need to do to be able to start building a car or find a car to buy and to get the experience you need to then go racing, and then how you do it. That's like the one thing. spec3.org/join.
Follow the recipe. We've made it as easy as we can.
Perfect. Guys, thanks again. I don't know if you could hear my dogs going off in the background, but follow them again, Spec3.
Spec3 Racing, at Spec3 Racing.
At Spec3 Racing, and on Instagram. Taylor's very, very good at responding. So I appreciate that. With that being said, guys, I think that's it for the podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Again. This was honestly a lot of fun, and I will see
Yeah, it sure
you
was.
Monday.